Hello everybody, Jake, your resident content cowboy here. Yeah, microphone, ow. Smack my microphone right away. It's Monday. On Mondays, we do tier lists, and on Wednesdays, we wear pink.
That is so...
Comfey.
Gretchen, stop trying to make
Comfey
happen. It's not going to happen.
Today, I am bringing you the Comfey release tier list. So this is a tier list up until the Comfey release, which just happened last week. I'm going to break down every single Pokemon and every single role inside of Pokemon Unite. This is a general tier list. I know there are some that are more specific. This isn't only competitive. This isn't only solo, duo, trio. This is just a broad look at everything inside of Pokemon Unite from my perspective. As always, if there's something that you absolutely love that I rank low, or something that you absolutely loathe that I rank high, it's all up to you as to what you want to play inside of Pokemon Unite. You can be the best D tier level Pokemon in the game, and you could be the worst S tier level Pokemon in the game. So I encourage you to continue playing what you like and getting better and better at that if there's something that you're really interested in. However, this is just going to be a look at where I think all of this falls sort of in a broad power level and oftentimes ranked against things of a similar category. Supporters against supports, attackers of one role against attackers of one role, mages, AD carries, things like that. And I will try to explain that as I go, which is why you might see a Pokemon ranked lower in a tier and you would think, well, I could carry a lot harder with this Pokemon than some defender, and that may be true, but I'm trying to rank them against each other, if that makes sense. All right, let's do this thing. Onto the tier list. Okay, let's take a look at our tiers. We have our God tier. We always have a God tier. We only have one God Pokemon of the week. We're not frickin' Norse around here. We have our S tier, these are broken tier. We have our A+ tier, the A+ teacher's pet tier. We have our A tier, the A great Pokemon tier. We have the B+ tier. And I hope you're sitting down, because we also have the B tier. Yeah. Still got the B tier. Ugh. We have our C tier, the Cameron. You okay tier? This is a tier where if you're picking this Pokemon and your name is Cameron, I'm going, Cameron, you okay? Because these aren't the greatest Pokemon, my guy. And then we have our D tier, our Decidueye Memorial tier, a tier named after Decidueye, where upon release it was so horrible it got its own tier, the Decidueye Memorial tier. All right, where to begin? Our newest release is Comfey. It's a supporter, so I'll probably save supporters for last. Let's start, you know what, let's start with something extremely good right here. I see some all-rounders at the top of my list down here, so let's do it. Urshifu. I'm going to throw Urshifu up into our S tier. I still think Urshifu is unbelievably broken. The dark build specifically, I think, is insane. The secure that you can get with it, if you watched a lot of the qualifiers from North America and EU, you saw a lot of teams using this. This is one of the #1 banned out Pokemon, one of the #1 picked Pokemon if it is not banned inside of competitive. And in solo, duo, trio, you've got insane damage, insane secure, one of the best Unite moves in the game. While we're talking about Urshifu, we might as well go with the Rapid Strike build. I do not think it's as broken as the Dark build, so I'm going to put it one tier lower. However, I think it's amazing. Its level 5 is one of the best level 5s inside of Pokemon Unite. In fact, coming from that central area, or jungle, as many of you know it as, coming from other MOBAs, coming from that central area and bringing Urshifu down into Path and fighting at level 5, it's almost unbeatable. It's one of the most broken level 5s inside the game. I do think it falls off later and its Unite move is quite awful. However, it's still an extremely good Pokemon. Starting with our all-rounders right here, Dark Bear, S tier, and then I would say Water Bear is A+, extremely good. While we're on our all-rounders, I don't have a Scyther Scissor delineation on this tier list, so I'm just going to throw this up right here. It's kind of hard because they are two different Pokemon with two different uses right here. I would say right now, Scyther is probably still hovering up into this S tier, and then I think Scissor is probably somewhere closer to A tier, maybe B+ after some nerfs, but I think this Pokemon is still unbelievably good. So I'm gonna put this right about here, maybe? Maybe I'll keep it A+ for now, just kind of split the difference right there. Again, Scyther, I think is a little, maybe even up to the S tier on this tier list. That's probably pretty fair in a lot of situations. However, it did get some nerfs, and I haven't seen it a ton since it got those nerfs because it also has kind of a weird bug to it. And then we've got Scissor, who I think is maybe a little lower, but I think A+ is a pretty fair place to put this Pokemon. In general, it's a really cool all-rounder where you have not only the all-rounder capabilities of Scissor, sort of this brawler situation that you can play in Path a little easier. You also have this essentially speedster assassin in Scyther. It's a really cool Pokemon. It's interesting. We're starting off with 2 Pokemon with 2 forms. That's kind of a fun way to do this thing. All right, really solid start. These are both great Pokemon here. Lucario. I'm gonna put Lucario in the A tier. It might even be A+. Lucario really has not fallen off since the release of Pokemon Unite. At points, it's been completely broken. I do think it's a little less powerful than it used to be, but a cool thing that we're seeing with Lucario, especially in competitive play, is when you are, you know, banning out certain Pokemon, it takes something that's A tier like Lucario and it gives it even more value. Still incredible in Path or Lane. And you're able to stack with it, even into the face of really coordinated teams. You're able to stack and dominate with Lucario. Great at last hitting, which is extremely important, and a really powerful Pokemon through most of the game. I think Lucario is doing extremely good in the meta right now too. Really hasn't fallen off at all. I mean, Lucario is just super good. Zarina. Zarina's an interesting one. I'm gonna put it B+. So I think Zarina was at one point almost S tier level broken. Maybe it even was S tier. It first released crazy, like crazy broken. I don't know if you remember Zarina release, but it was insane. Now I'm not thinking that this Pokemon really has as much value as it used to have. It's so much squishier, it feels like, than it used to be. Still has great burst damage. But it's just a lot harder to survive long enough to get the value out of it that you used to. I don't think it's bad, but I also am not blown away by it. I think it's better than average, and B kind of feels like decent Pokemon. B+ feels like this is a little bit better. I like every other all-rounder that I put above it right here more than I like Zarina right now, even though you can pop off with this Pokemon. Let's see. This is a weird one. Let's talk about Azumarill. I think Azumarill is right here in the B+ tier. I really like Azumarill, and they gave it a weird nerf recently that I didn't think would mean too much, even though it nerfs my favorite ability, which is Water Pulse and Water Pulse Plus. If you see my streams, you know how much I love Water Pulse Plus. They nerfed its Water Pulse Plus, and I feel like it was a completely unjustified nerf looking back on it. Yes, that move was awesome, and it could do some silly damage at certain points, but I don't think Azumarill was dominating so hard that they really needed to bring this Pokemon in line at all. Now, I don't know. I'm not in love with its position in the game, although I think it's pretty good. Competitively, every time I see it picked, it loses. So I think it's just not solid enough on a competitive standpoint. However, solo, duo, trio, it's extremely strong, evolves at level 4. You don't need it in the center area at all. You play it in lane or path. Pokemon Unite calls it path, but MOBA players know it as lane. That's why I use these terms interchangeably. So I think Azumarill really good, really strong early. I wish its Unite move was maybe a little more impactful. I used to feel like its Unite move was kind of a more impactful move because it got bigger buffs after using it, but still doing pretty well inside the game, even though I feel like it got some odd nerfs that it probably didn't need to get. Okay, Dragonite. Dragonite's right here in the B+ for me. It might even move into A. I actually think Dragonite's just not the flavor of the week right now, but from playing it and from seeing it with some top competitive players, I think Dragonite's in a really solid place right here. In fact, if I had to rank these 3, and these tiers are not exactly in order once they're inside of a category, that's kind of hard to do considering we have so many different roles. But if I had to rank these 3, I actually think Dragonite might provide more value than both of the other 2 inside of this situation. The thing is, Dragonite still has Hyper Beam. It still attacks at range, so you can fight and not put yourself in as bad a position as you need to be if you're right up next to enemies. And given it has Hyper Beam, you're able to secure objectives. Securing objectives is one of the most important things you can do in Pokemon Unite, which is why I think Dark Bear is so good, why Power Up Punch Lucario is so unbelievably amazing, and why Hyper Beam Dragonite is so good. This might even be a little higher. The thing about Dragonite is it doesn't brawl particularly well. That's kind of the weird thing. All the all-rounders seem to kind of be this class of Pokemon that like to brawl and fight. I don't think it brawls and fights as well as some others, but it outputs decent damage from range. And honestly, solo, duo, trio, it probably provides more value than most all of these all-rounders on the list. It's really solid. Okay, let's see who's next. Buzzwole. Buzzwole's such a weird one. It feels like it has such high value and such low value at times, and I have to put it B for that reason. So here's what's going on with Buzzwole. First off, the buffs that they gave it are amazing buffs. I love the Buzzwole buffs that they ended up giving this Pokemon. The problem that you have with Buzzwole is late game, which when I'm talking about late game, I usually mean from like 2 minutes 30 seconds on about 2 minutes when Rayquaza hits the battlefield, right? In that moment, it doesn't feel like it outputs enough for how close it has to be to enemies to make everything about it work. Now, if you're already winning, this is a great Pokemon. If you're already winning and you can kind of catch an enemy or two with a nice superpower or something like that, you're in great position. But if you're getting ready for sort of a 5-on-5 fight at the end, which happens pretty frequently, I think this Pokemon just feels like it's too right up in the enemy's faces with not providing enough value, and if you get stunned, you're just in a lot of trouble with it. So while I love it through 80% of the game, the last 20% I don't love with Buzzwole, and for that reason I have to put it B tier right here. I think it's a good Pokemon and can dominate early, but I do think it falls off a bit late. Aegislash is a weird one. I have to be honest, I'm not exactly sure where I'd want to put Aegislash, because part of me thinks in the hands of a great player, I think this is A, and in the hands of a bad player, this is maybe C or something like that. I'm gonna put it B+ right here. Basically, looking at every all-rounder inside the game, there really isn't an all-rounder that I think is awful and you wouldn't want on your, like, all of them work. You could have any of these on your team. All of them provide value. I think Aegislash in some ways provides more value than Azumarill. Again, these aren't really ordered, but it secures better, its boosted attacks are better, it fights a little bit better. However, I do feel like it falls into this tier where B+ for me feels like these are really good Pokemon, but a lot more situationally good than maybe something a little bit higher. And that's about where I'd put Aegislash right now. It's solid. They nerfed it a little while back because it was performing so well. Because of that, you could probably say it's still A, but I also really don't see it played too often anymore either. So maybe if we see a resurgence of Aegislash, we could see kind of how it compares to the rest of the meta, but I really don't feel like I see it played too often here. Our next all-rounder, Tyranitar, S tier. Tyranitar's insane. You're seeing Tyranitar in competitive play. Of course, you're seeing it solo, duo, trio play and stuff like that. It's amazing. If you can put a healer with a Tyranitar, I mean, it's just so incredibly difficult to deal with. Even in games where it doesn't feel like the Tyranitar does a lot, that's oftentimes because the enemy team has prioritized so much into stopping this Pokemon from doing what it needs to do. I think Tyranitar is the perfect example of an early game Pokemon and a late game monster. Tyranitar is awesome. I think it's an S tier Pokemon for sure. However, it needs a lot to get going, which can make it a little tough sometimes if you're playing it solo. You have to make sure you're getting your experience, because if you do, you can carry the team in some massive fights. Where's our next all-rounder here? Do we have another here? All right, well, let's start with some other ones first before I get to this one that I'm really unhappy with. Machamp is either B+ or A. It's solid. It might be better than Zarina right now, actually. I'm gonna put it A. Here, Machamp's a weird one. I think Dynamic Punch and either Cross Chop or Close Combat, very, very good. I don't love Submission Machamp, but I know some people like to run it so that they can make me mad. No, some people like to use it so that they can have that unstoppable effect and get towards enemies. I think Machamp's Unite move alone sets it up as one of the best Pokemon in the game at times. And it also performs really well early. You don't need to give it a lot of support. It last hits well with Karate Chop now. I think Machamp's overall pretty dang good. I would put it under Lucario for whatever it's worth, but I do think it has a little more value probably than something like Zarina right now. Although they're close. They are very, very close. I think it edges out a little bit of this B+ tier for me. Even though I'm not absolutely in love with it, I have to say, I kind of feel, maybe I just feel a little bored with this Pokemon. I've played a lot of Machamp, but I do think it provides good value to the team. Okay, Garchomp. I mean, I don't know. This might be one of the most controversial picks on the list, but Garchomp is probably A tier right now, which is crazy to say, but I'm seeing it used competitively from top teams in EU to top teams in NA. I'm seeing people actually find a ton of value in Garchomp. Most are running the Dragon build. I was watching Team YouTube over the weekend running the Dig build, the ground Garchomp build, working extremely well. It tears through objectives. It farms extremely well. It's pretty dang strong. Its Unite move is impactful. I can't believe we're at a point where I'm actually saying this, but I really think Garchomp is A tier. It might be B+. I might be being too kind to it, but it actually works really well, and I'm seeing people have a lot of success with it in Path, which is pretty wild. As a Pokemon that has sat near the bottom of tier lists for a long time, I actually think Garchomp's doing pretty well. Maybe I'm overvaluing it just because I'm so happy to be actually seeing good Garchomps out there, but I think Garchomp's doing pretty well. Okay. Is that every all-rounder except the one that makes me so mad I can't believe it? All right, let's do it. Charizard. I don't know what they did. I'm so disappointed with the Charizard nerfs. The Charizard nerfs are kind of wild to me. I think this Pokemon is super underwhelming right now. D tier might be a little harsh, but things I'm putting in the D tier, I'm putting there for a reason. And it's because these Pokemon really need some love. And I hope people seeing this can kind of understand why I'm setting a Pokemon there. Charizard got so much damage taken away from it, and it's just wild. And I'm not saying you can't win with it. It just feels so much weaker than it used to be. This Pokemon is in need of some buffs. Something that I put in the D tier, regardless of how you perform with them, they need some buffs. And I hope Char gets some buffs. It's one of my favorite Pokemon to play, especially in that central area. And right now, I think it's just rough, man. I think Char's just in such a rough spot. I think I've got all the all-rounders. The roster's getting so big that I always end up missing something, and I have to kick myself for doing it. But all right, let's move on to our next category here. Where do we want to go next? Let's see if we can go to our... Let's go to our attackers. Let's move to our attackers next. There are a lot of attackers, and they kind of filter into a few different roles. There's sort of the 80 carry, which is attack damage carry Pokemon. This is a Pokemon that's supposed to carry the team mostly through its attacks. These are like Cinderace, Greninja, things like that. Then we have sort of more of our Mage damage Pokemon. There are the ones that are less mobile, and then there are ones that are more mobile. The ones that are less mobile feel more almost support attacker, where you're doing good damage, nice chunks of damage, but you're also doing things like stuns and knockups and things like that. So let's go ahead and start right here. We'll do our we'll do our mages. Why not? Because I got the first one right here. Mew. Mew's insane. Mew's crazy. Mew is S tier without question. Mew still needs nerfs. I think this Pokemon is unbelievably brutal inside the game. You get insane moves at level 1. You can switch these insane moves around at level 5. You can do massive amounts of damage at absurd range. I think Mew is one of the most busted characters inside the game right there. A definite contender for our God tier a little later in the video. I just think Mew's insane. People are putting it in Path. You're also seeing it now in the central area, jungling position inside the game. Mew's crazy. I don't even know what else to say about it. It's one of the craziest Pokemon. I just think it's nuts. Here's another one that's S. I feel like this teeters between A+ and S, but I honestly think even in competitive, it's almost S, and in every other sense, it definitely is, and that's Delphox. Delphox is crazy. Flame Charge, Mystical Fire Delphox is unbelievable. The resets on it are absurd. Its Unite move has almost no cooldown. It's one of the best Unite moves in the game. Delphox, in my opinion, is... it's just unbelievable. It's an unbelievable attacker. It puts other mage attackers besides Mew to absolute shame. I mean, it's just so incredibly good. Let's go with some other mages here. Okay. I'm going to talk about these two kind of in the same breath here. And if they're used properly, if you're using them for this particular role, then I think both of these kind of fall in a similar space. And that is going to be Pikachu and Alolan Ninetales. I would say Pikachu and Alolan Ninetales for me, in this kind of support attacker role, probably fall into the B tier, maybe as high as B+. Alolan Ninetales might edge out Pikachu just a little bit, and it's only because of the Rapid Fire Scarf. I think both of these Pokemon are solid, but they are very much a support Pokemon. And what I mean by that is not a supporter, but their job is not to carry the team necessarily with damage, even though both of them can output lots of damage because you're fighting at range. Your job is to set up opportunities for your team to win fights because you are stunning enemies, basically. Volt Tackle or Thunderbolt, as well as either, you know, Dazzling Gleam, Aurora Veil, even the Ice build on Ninetales. You're really setting up big opportunities for your team to crush the enemy team. That's what you're doing with these Pokemon. You're not frontlining, you're not doing anything like that. Your job is to support your squad. You do a ton of damage, but mostly you're setting up great moments for your team. I actually love playing both these Pokemon. I love having both these Pokemon on the team. Again, the only thing I think that makes Ninetales a little bit better right now is Rapid Fire Scarf, because on certain Pokemon, Rapid Fire Scarf is busted, and Ninetales is one of them. Both of them are great additions to a team. They just feel very specific in what their job is. And while we're talking about Pokemon kind of like that, let's get a few more up here that feel similar to that. I'm going to put Espeon as B+ as well, and I'm going to put Cramorant probably as A. So here's the reason that Cramorant's A. I think the Hurricane Surf build with Cramorant is probably right down there with Pikachu. It's fine. It's a support attacker. You do damage, you stay at range, you set up fights for your team with nice amounts of stun and CC and actually a decent secure on it. The reason I think Cram is A is because of the Dive build. Dive is its own animal, it's its own thing, very high skill ceiling. It's a really solid build. It's really hard to shut this Pokemon down. It also has a Unite move that can zone out fights in some really interesting ways. Cram is a weird one. It's probably heading for another nerf. Why? Nobody knows. Nobody knows why. They just nerf Cramorant no matter what. Like literally every time they come up with some patch notes, they go, what are we gonna do for this one? There's always a buffer nerf that makes no sense. Where they're like, we're going to nerf Wigglytuff right now. And then there's, of course, there are buffs that you're like, are you out of your mind? There's always a buff where you go, you're buffing Lucario? What are you doing? And then for no reason, I don't know why, someone in the room raises their hand and they say, can we nerf Cramorant again? And they all agree to it and it gets nerfed every time. So it's a really good Pokemon. Surf Hurricane, probably closer to the B tier, but Dive, Air Slash, I think is closer to the A tier. Espeon, since we didn't talk much about this, I actually think Espeon in a lot of ways is really setting itself up as another sort of option for the kind of that Pikachu role, and its damage is a little more focused. The burst is a little more impressive on Espeon, and it feels like you burst and stun at the same time. So you get Psyshock or something like that, and you get a massive amount of burst and stun at once. I think it probably has a little more value than Pikachu, but both of them are, again, that sort of support attacker role. You're stunning, immobilizing enemies, and also outputting pretty good damage. Let's move on to sort of this. We could do 80 attack Pokemon, but I'd rather talk about sort of this weird flex role inside of Unite, which is, I'm just going to put them all on the board. They're not going in the C tier, but it's going to be Sylveon, Glaceon, kind of Venusaur falls into this category as well. And I think that's about it for this role of attackers, right? Well, I haven't talked about Guardy, and that's a mage yet. So let's do Guardy really quick, and then we'll move on. So I'll throw these up here, and we'll talk about them. Gardevoir is actually doing really well right now. It got some buffs a while back. It's performing extremely well competitively. I think it is directly comparable to Delphox. And if you directly compare it to Delphox, Delphox is better. But that being said, I think Guardy's doing really well right now. I could put it up in this A tier, possibly even up into the A+ tier. It's extremely strong. It does tons of damage at range. Its Unite move has a decent enough cooldown to be used multiple times throughout the battle and not feel like, I used it my 1 of 2 times. So Guardy's doing really well right now. It evolves earlier. It actually plays okay in Path. So I really like Gardevoir. It might even be close to an A+ tier, but I think A is a really solid place to put this Pokemon. Probably from a mage perspective outside of Delphox and Mew, which is just an anomaly. I think it's the best mage. Like, it's better than Cramorant's mage. It's better than Ninetales mage. I think it's probably the strongest mage in that respect. Guardy's doing really well right now. Now let's talk about these weird hybrid attackers that we have right here. We've got Glaceon, Sylveon, and Venusaur. Venusaur's Solar Beam build, I actually think is not very good. Every time I have a Solar Beam Venusaur on my team, they're pretty underwhelming. I think you need some specific stuff to make it work, and it's just so much worse than Petal Dance Giga Drain. However, there is Petal Dance, Giga Drain, Venusaur, which for me is an easy A tier Pokemon. So I don't think Solar Beam is currently the call. I just don't think it does enough. It's weird. It does good damage, but there's a Pokemon like Mew that can do what Venusaur's Solar Beam can do, literally, and it has the mobility to get away from situations. It's just like, it's almost like Venusaur is just, that version of it is just such bad Mew, it's not even crazy. Not even crazy? I was gonna say it's not even funny. But you know what? It's not crazy either. I need a sip of coffee. Hold on. Ah, Jake is back with you. Okay. Solar Beam, kind of meh, but I think Petal Dance Giga Drain is insane. So I think an AA tier is a very fair place to put this Pokemon. Glaceon, I think, is actually probably teetering into A+ because of Icy Wind. Icicle Spear, by the way, still a very good build. It has a really good, it has some really good uses because it rips objectives really, really well, and you can actually target it onto some of the squishier enemies and just kind of make sure that they go down using your Unite move. But Icy Wind is really where this Pokemon is shining because it just does so much burst damage. You're seeing it competitively, and if you're playing by yourself, you know, it's a really easy Pokemon to get online. You only need level 6 before you can really start doing some damage, and then level 10 you get that plus bonus as well. I think Glaceon's doing very, very well. Both builds are solid, but Icy Wind really seems to be where it's at for this Pokemon. It's just so much damage. It's kind of a alarming amount of damage every time it hits you. And then we have Sylveon, who I'm going to put up into the A tier. Again, we're not really ranking these all against each other in the A tier. Anywhere here I think is fine. Mystical Fire is actually doing really well, and Hyper Voice still has some pretty good use. This is a weird Pokemon because it's a tanky attacker. It's kind of an all-rounder, honestly. It feels like a Mage kind of all-rounder like Pokemon to me, and I think that's really cool. The problem with this, maybe playing solo, is sometimes you can't fully carry with it because if you're Hyper Voice, you can't secure objectives, and if you're Mystical Fire, you really can't even chip down objectives, so it has that issue with it. But a lot of teams are finding it in a role that you might have normally found things like Pikachu and Ninetales in, and teams are slotting in things like Sylveon, and I think in that role, it's doing really, really well. Sylveon's doing great inside the meta right now. A, I think, is a really nice place for it. And now we've got sort of our attack damage carries. Let's put them all on the board right here. Greninja, Decidueye, Dragapult, Cinderace, and Duraludon. Excuse me, guys. Why don't you hop on down here? I think I've got all my attackers on this list. As always, I'm going to miss something. Okay, let's talk about our AD carries. I think they're all pretty solid in the game right now for different reasons. I think if you are looking at this from a completely solo perspective, I think one of them fails miserably compared to the others, and that's Decidueye. So the thing with Decidueye is it is amazing and it's doing really well competitively, but it is not amazing by yourself because it is the most punishable Pokemon inside the game. If you're playing solos, even duos, trios, it's just such a hard Pokemon to protect. That being said, if you can protect it, Decidueye is super, super good. The rest of them can actually, they have some ways to get out of fights. Greninja has multiple dashes, so Greninja's doing fine. Cinderace has a dash and a repositioning inside of Blaze Kick. Dragapult, if you're running Dragon Dance, you at least have that to get away. And Shadow Ball can give you a little bit of a dash. And then with Duraludon, you have Dragon Tail, which lets you knock up enemies, reposition, fight. You know, it's all pretty solid here. In general, I think as a role, all the AD carries are doing well, and the biggest reason for that is the Rapid Fire Scarf. I think the Rapid Fire Scarf is, I mean, it's kind of perfectly made for all of these Pokemon, and it just lets them set up and shred and do even better than they were doing before. The Rapid Fire Scarf being one of the biggest, you know, game-changing additions inside Pokemon Unite recently. If I had to rank all of these against each other, for me, I think Duraludon's still wildly slept on. I'm going to put it up in the A tier. Yes, it got some nerfs recently, but this Pokemon is dummy good. It's really, really good. I think you could easily say that Greninja and Cinderace are kind of right there along with it, but I wouldn't I wouldn't argue too much if I saw any of these drop down to the B+ tier. For B+, I'm going to put Dragapult B+. The reason I think Dragapult is at times a little under these other Pokemon is just its mobility. I don't think it has the same kind of mobility unless you're using Dragon Dance, but the problem with Dragon Dance is it's good against people who don't know what's happening. But if you know what's happening, I think it's very easy to exploit a Dragon Dance Dragapult. So I think this Pokemon, because of its mobility, has to hang out in the B+ tier right here. And then Decidueye is really hard. I honestly think if it's solo, it's probably in the C or D tier at times. It's just so easily punished. And then Coordinated, this Pokemon might even be as high as A+ at times. Spirit Shackle is unbelievably good. The range at which you're able to do damage and the damage it outputs is amazing. For that, I'm going to settle this one into the B+ tier. It's the most fair I can be, I think, with this Pokemon. I will say, out of all of these, I think I like playing Decidueye the most. I love Spirit Shackle. I have some games where you absolutely go off, but the big problem is if there is any Pokemon on the enemy team that can move a little bit, dash towards you, just a little bit, you're in so much trouble. There's really not much you can do about it, and not coordinated, like not fully coordinated on a team, it's just such an easy Pokemon to punish. So that's where I'm going to spread my attackers right now. I think they're all doing pretty well, all the AD carries. A lot of the attackers doing pretty well inside Pokemon Unite. There aren't ones that I feel like if they don't get buffs, you know, you'll never get to play them. I think they're actually all doing pretty good. Let's move on to let's do Speedsters. All right. And of course, I'm sure I've missed something so far. I have to run into something at some point that I've missed. Our Speedsters. Let's start with my favorite Speedster, Dodrio. I think this Pokemon's A+. I don't think it's S. I think they nerfed it out of being into the S category. I think both builds are amazing. They're situational. So there are certain comps, enemy team compositions that you would not want to run Drill Peck into, and there are certain enemy team compositions that you would not want to run Tri Attack into. And it really depends on your play style and kind of the stuns and what they have on the enemy team. But I think Dodrio is amazing. It does have some pretty good counters inside the game. Really, anything that can output stuns and slows to this Pokemon make its life kind of miserable, but it's my favorite Pokemon in the game, and I think it's still doing really, really well. You can play it in Path, and you can also play it in the central area. It's a really solid, it's a really solid Speedster. I don't know what that was. I think I was like, solid. That was a really, really solid Speedster. All right, our next Speedster I want to talk about is going to be Absol. I think Absol's doing pretty good. I think it's good. Like, I don't hate it. I don't love it. I think B+ is pretty fair. It could be B maybe, but it's solid. It does pretty good damage. Both of its builds have some merit to it. It's very specific. I feel like I don't see it played too much, but people who are good with Absol can actually get some decent value out of it. It falls off a little late game, but its Unite move is actually pretty solid with objectives and fighting in kind of that final moment. When you kind of see the enemies are grouping up, feels a little bit like a Machamp Unite in some ways. You can just set it up and do a ton of damage right there. So I like Absol. I don't love it. I like it. I think B+ is a fair place to put it right here. Let's see. Our next Speedster. All right, Talonflame. I'm going to put it C tier. At times, that's even being generous. I really do think this Pokemon could use some buffs. It's outclassed, even very specifically by Dodrio, but it's kind of outclassed by a lot of Speedsters in different ways. In some ways, Talonflame is a better central area Pokemon than something like Absol that I have higher on this list. But I think in general, Talon has just lost so much value because scoring matters a lot less. I think we need to do something to bring this Pokemon back into prominence. I love Talon. It's also a rough teammate to always have on your side. For whatever reason, people who play Talon, they never play with the team. So I'm sorry, Talonflame, but I'm not happy with you right now in the meta. Zoroark. This is actually going to be higher than I would expect to put Zoroark. I didn't expect this until I saw people playing Feint Attack Zoroark, and then I started playing Feint Attack Zoroark, and wow, this is really good. It's better than Night Slash, especially in the ending fight. So that's the biggest thing about it, is I actually can see some value in that final fight with this Pokemon, and it rips through things really well at level 5. You can get some super surprising KOs, and it's not that difficult of a combo to pull off once you kind of start to get the hang of how Feint Attack works. So because of that, I think it's actually really solid. and it's getting competitive play with some top players. It's really cool to see a Pokemon like this kind of actually get some use. I was never really in love with Zoroark until I really sat down and started playing Feint Attack, and now I like it a lot. I think it's doing really, really well. Let's see, who is next? What speedster will we do next? Okay, where do I put you? Where do I put you, Gengar? Gengar is probably B+. Well, here's the thing. All right, so competitively, I think Gengar is very low. It's really hard to pull off in a 5 versus 5 environment. But then in a solo environment, Gengar is very, very good. It's like really good in a solo environment. Even in a duo trio, I think it kind of gets outclassed unless your team is really supporting it. I'm going to put Gengar as B+. Here's the thing. I don't want to see Gengar get any buffs or nerfs. I think it's fine where it is. I think it's a really difficult Pokemon to balance. You give it a little more damage, it does too much damage. You take a little damage away from it, now all of a sudden it's useless. I think Gengar is in a solid place in the game right now. This B+ tier is a tier full of Pokemon that I think have some advantages, some disadvantages, but overall I think Gengar is doing pretty well. Again, if this was a solo only tier list, this is pretty near the top because it's a hard carry. And if you get a lot of experience on this Pokemon, you can wipe the entire enemy team. But it's also one of the easiest speedsters to counter, in my opinion. So I think B+ is a pretty fair place for this Pokemon. Our next speedster is Crustle. No, just kidding. Our next speedster is going to be everybody's favorite, Zeraora. I'm putting Zeraora in the D tier. You guys got to understand where I'm coming from with Zeraora. This Pokemon is phenomenal in certain situations when it has a huge level advantage. If they change the leveling on this Pokemon, and this is why it is in this D tier, it needs buffs. If they change the leveling on this Pokemon, it could easily be meta. It could easily be one of the top choices inside the game. But right now, it's just on an island of some of the worst level scaling inside the game, and you might say, well, I see people do really well with Zeraora. Yeah, it's a carry. It should be carrying games. And you know what? It shouldn't have to level so much to carry the way it does. I think Zeraora it feels like a forgotten Pokemon at some points. I know that they nerfed it a lot because near the beginning of the game it was crazy. They've nerfed this Pokemon a lot, but I would really like to see it get some buffs. I would just really like to see it be a little more competitive and a little more playable. I don't think Zeraora is doing very well inside the game right now at all. You also never see it in a competitive setting because people just can't find value for it. Let's move on to our defenders, shall we? Who do we want to start with first? There are a lot of great defenders in the game right now. Let's start with, you know what? Let's start with one that's really risen up the ranks for me, and that's Blastoise. I think Blastoise is probably A tier right now. It might even be a little bit better. After seeing it get so much competitive play, I'm actually really, really impressed with Blastoise. And now let me fix my list right here so you get to see more of it. Okay, that's a little bit better here. So, Blastoise. I think Blastoise is actually doing really well. I undervalued this Pokemon a little while back, and now that I'm seeing it used competitively in both builds, I'm just actually really shocked by its output, but it's great. Surf Hydro Pump, lot of value. Rapid Spin Water Spout, lot of value. So I think this Pokemon is doing really well in multiple builds, multiple team compositions. Its Unite move is still insane. I'm really loving Blastoise, and I actually did not expect it would be so high on my tier list until I saw it work so well competitively. And I've actually been playing a lot of it solo as well and having a ton of fun with it. I think Blastoise is in a great spot. You want to know something that's in an amazing spot? Slowbro, A+. Slowbro's killing it right now. The Scald build is actually seeing competitive play, which is great. Scald is amazing because you're outputting insane amounts of damage as a defender. You're also the most un-KOable Pokemon in the game. It's just so crazy. Its Unite move is also devastating because it essentially sets your team up to shut down one of the hardest carry Pokemon on the enemy team. Basically, if I'm playing Slowbro and I see Greninja on the enemy team, I'm not using my Unite move. until Greninja's around, and then you grab Greninja or the equivalent of that, the Scyther, whatever it is on the team. I think Slowbro is crushing it right now. You're seeing it a ton competitively. I love it. A+ for sure. Great Pokemon. Even the Surf build, honestly, Surf is a great build for this Pokemon too. So a lot of variety in what you see from it. Another Pokemon that I think is awesome, maybe not getting as much competitive play as I expected, is Mamoswine. I think Mamoswine is brutal. You know what? You might even be able to put Blastoise up here too. These are all so good. These defenders are really crushing it right now. I think I might even put Blastoise up here in the A+ tier. Yeah, I think I will. They're really doing well, and they're setting up some amazing situations for their team. While we're at it, I'm going to throw another one up here too, because it's an insane defender. All of these are incredible in the right setup. I think Snorlax is the one that probably falls off the hardest solo for me, because it just doesn't output the same kind of damage that the other three do. That being said, having a good defender on your team right now is so incredibly valuable, and all 4 of these Pokemon are doing very, very well. Snorlax, Heavy Slam block is insane. With Mamoswine, Icicle Crash, high horsepower. Some people are trying Ice Fang, but I think it's just a little too close range, and you can't make some of the wilder plays that you could with it otherwise. But all of these defenders are doing great. Now let's talk about some defenders that are very specific and kind of very wildly. Trevenant, I'm gonna put B. I think Trevenant doesn't get the value that these other 4 do, and I do think there's a bit of a chasm there, as you can see, the B+ tier and A tier. Maybe it's a little better than this, but it's only slightly. The thing with Trevenant is it doesn't position itself as well as the others, and its Unite move isn't as impactful. It's maybe more impactful than Snorlax, but even Snorlax can kind of, you know, set up some incredible stuff where it heals itself all the way back to full. I think part of Trevenant's issue is that it's just harder to get to the enemies sometimes than it is with these other Pokemon. Heavy Slam, obviously, from Snorlax, you get right to them. Slowbro also has this issue, but Slowbro is even more un-KOable, I feel like, than Trevenant at times. It's probably the most un-KOable Pokemon in the game. So I think Trev could use some love, and Trevenant's Pain Split needs a full-on complete change. And maybe once they do that, this Pokemon will actually be really good. Let's talk about Crustle. I'm going to put it C. I think it's fair. I think people underrate the Rock Tomb build, but no one's playing it. So I actually think, if we're talking, it's weird. Maybe I'll put it B. Here's the problem. I think it's one of the worst played Pokemon in the game right there with Talonflame. I really do. I think Rock Tomb X Scissor as a defender provides an insane amount of value. I'm going to put it B, but I think if you were talking about how your allies are playing it, it's probably D. So that's the hard thing about a Pokemon like this. I wanted to get some buffs too, honestly. If B feels average, I still think it needs something. I still think they need to give it some love, because I'd love to see a Pokemon like this become a little more meta, but just nobody's going to pick it up at this point. So yeah, I'm going to keep it C. I think it's fair. Even though I do think people are sleeping on some of the value you can get out of it, I think all the Pokemon in my C and D tier, I would really love to see them give some love to, some buffs for sure. And then we have Greedent, which is unbelievable in the right hands, but not many people are playing it right now. I think A is a fair category to put Greedent in. At times, I would say this Pokemon is S, but I don't think it actually has that much value in the current game right now. And I think if you're putting it on your team, you know, there's something you have to pop off. And as a defender, sometimes I think it would be disappointing to have a Greedent as opposed to something like a Mamoswine or a Slowbro, even though it's one of my favorite Pokemon. It's my most played Pokemon in the game. It's a very different kind of defender, and I think it does its job really well, but it also is not doing the full-on front line that you would expect from some of your defenders. It's kind of a weird, it reminds me actually a lot of Sylveon. I feel like it has a similar role to something like Sylveon, a similar role to Dodrio, kind of similar to Talon, where they're sort of harassers, and they're all over the map, but it does it does have a difficulty where you're trying to figure out how to slot it. That being said, if you know how to play Greedent's, I mean, it's a great Pokemon. You can win with it pretty well. All right, on to the supporters, which is a stacked category. And of course, our newest addition to the game, Comfey, is a supporter. So we'll be talking about Comfey here in just a minute. Let's go through them all. All right, Clefable. Clefable, I think, is probably A+ right now, rocketing up. The healing on this Pokemon is insane. It's crazy. You're consistently seeing this Pokemon heal 200,000 damage. Its heal is up all the time. 200,000 maybe a little high, but like 150,000 plus is what you're seeing from this Pokemon all the time. Gravity is really solid right now. Follow Me can set up some amazing stuff. I think Draining Kiss is a fun build. It kind of puts you closer towards this almost all-rounder take with this Pokemon, but in reality, if you have a Clefable on the team, you want to be outputting insane amounts of healing to your allies, and that is with Moonlight. Moonlight is really gross right now. The healing's crazy good. There's a reason you're seeing this Pokemon competitively. It's easy to keep not only a specific ally alive, but your whole team alive, which is really, really solid. So A+, I think, is super fair. Let's talk about another A+. This one might even be higher, and that's Hoopa. Hoopa all of a sudden rocketing up a tier list. A Pokemon that for a long time felt like it didn't really have a place inside of the meta. Now the Hyperspace Hole Hoopa build is crazy. Well, Phantom Force, okay. They took a move that was really hard to use, really specific, and they made it so easy. You don't have to target an enemy or ally with it. You can bounce around wherever you want to on the map. You push people, you do damage, you can bounce back. You can use hyperspace holes basically on an infinite loop. People don't have to worry about taking them if they've taken one too recently. You use your Unite move multiple times a match, whereas before you only really had it twice. Now you can easily see 3 Hoopa Unites inside of a match. Hoopa is skyrocketing up the tier list here. Better competitively than it is solo, of course, but in general, Hoopa is crushing it right now. And now on to another supporter who's crushing it, and that is Eldegoss. Eldegoss is amazing. Incredible damage, great shielding, great healing, a really good Unite move, amazing in path. It doesn't need a lot of experience to be very good. Rapid Fire Scarf and things like that are kind of dummy good on Hoopa and on LD. Yeah, supporters are nuts right now inside Pokemon Unite, and having a good one on your team is extremely valuable. Let's talk about a supporter that's maybe not as nuts, and that's Wigglytuff. Wigglytuff, I think, is probably B tier, maybe B+. It's somewhere in this range. It's a tank Pokemon, but as a tank, I feel like I see so many defenders that I'd probably rather have, and its Unite move, I think, has really fallen off. It just doesn't give you enough shielding. I think it needs to get more. I don't even know what it gives. I don't know how much better it is than Eldegoss's shielding. I'm actually just thinking about that. I'm kind of curious as to what this even looks like from a shielding perspective. I'm sure it's bigger, but it just doesn't feel like it does enough. Love this Pokemon. I do think you probably need a little something to make it better, but if you buff this Pokemon, all of a sudden it's going to be one of the best Pokemon inside the game once again. Next supporter on the list, Blissey. A+, maybe S, maybe S. It's so good. Blissey's so good. Safeguard, soft boiled, all of it's amazing. Clefable's the only thing keeping this out of S for me right now, honestly, is Clefable. So because of Clefable, I think this Pokemon actually maybe doesn't make it up into this S tier currently, just because it has competition now. Like Eldegoss and Clefable are actually great competition for this Pokemon. So for the time being, I think I'm gonna keep it A+, but just know all of these supporters are amazing right now. I could see an argument for Blissey, Clefable, Hoopa, kind of all of them possibly being S. Mime. All right. I mean, maybe it's S, maybe. I did see it fall off a lot competitively after the nerfs, but I don't think they've hurt Mime too much. I do think Power Swap has lost a decent amount of value. I don't know. I still think Mime is nuts. It's so good. I'm keeping it out of the S tier currently just because I am seeing way less play on it, and that leads me to believe that people who are, you know, playing this at a very, very high level are noticing that this Pokemon just doesn't seem to have the same output that it used to. That being said, I don't think it's any lower than an A+ tier, like super insanely solid Pokemon. Let me fix my list here really quick. All right, and now on to Sableye. Sableye, I think, is probably A right now. It might even be higher. I haven't got to play a ton with it since the nerfs, but I actually think that they've set this Pokemon up to at least be a little punishable. It could still be A+, it could still be a really amazing choice. It's teetering between A and A+. I don't think it feels as broken. They've given this Pokemon multiple nerfs now, and while it's one of the least fun things to deal with in the game, I don't think that means it's the most broken thing inside the entire game. But it's still pretty amazing. I don't know. I might even keep it A+. It's hard to argue that it's A+, right? It's really good. I think it's either A or A+. And it's so specific. You know what? It reminds me again of Greedent. What a specific Pokemon. This weird harasser sort of thing where you wouldn't look at the ending stat screen of a Sableye and know that it did everything inside the match, but playing against one, the jungle invades from it. That's when it runs over that central area and just starts fighting with a center area Pokemon, taking their buffs, and really leaves it unpunished. I'm going to put it A for now. But I could be wrong about that. This could be actually a little bit higher. We'll see how badly these nerfs hurt it once we get to see it more competitively. And now, on to our final Pokemon of the week, Comfey. I'm going to pop it up into our God tier right here and talk about it for a second, and then I'll let you know where I think Comfey lands. Really fun Pokemon. I think its play style, once you understand it, once you understand sort of attaching to an ally, shielding them, healing them, popping off, boosted attacking, back onto an ally. Once you sort of get the Comfey combo, as I call it, that little flow with it, I actually think this is a really fun Pokemon. What this Pokemon feels like to me is something that when you're ahead and doing well and you have someone who's going nuts on your team, this Pokemon just makes it even better, right? This Pokemon just does even better when someone on your team is kind of popping off. And when your team is not doing well, this Pokemon is like the worst thing you could possibly ever have. So some people have said that they think something that is amazing about Comfey is that when it's on an ally, it's not targetable. And I both agree and disagree with that in different sort of thoughts here. So part of being a support, all of these supports are super tanky for the most part. Not everyone has the exact same stats or anything like that, but this Blissey can have up to 10,000 HP. You know, Mr. Mime is a tank in and of itself. So having this Pokemon, Wiggly obviously is another tank. Hoopa even has a lot of HP. So having this Pokemon attached to an ally and not targetable is good for Comfey, but not always good for the team, because it actually is nice when the team is throwing some damage towards a Mr. Mime or Blissey or something like that, because those Pokemon can soak up damage pretty well. So it actually being attached to an ally, again, for Comfey sounds good, but from a team-wide perspective, I actually don't think it's the most solid thing you could do. And then we have to look at Comfey's moves. I think Grass Knot is actually probably the better choice between Grass Knot and Magical Leaf. However, I don't think it actually works that well because I think it doesn't cast the way you need this move to. I think it should cast a lot faster. It should be a lot easier to hit enemy Pokemon with it because Magical Leaf is a sure hit on just everything around it. Given the way this Pokemon plays right now, I think Magical Leaf is the better choice. Sweet Kiss is really cool, and I think high-level competitive teams could probably make good use out of it, but in general, it feels like not the play. The healing feels like the play, but the healing is lower than you would expect. You're leaving the match healing a lot less than some of these other Pokemon are, but you are shielding a lot, which is really cool. It's just a number that we can't really see, so I think it's hard to really gauge how much Comfey is doing. However, I have to say, compared to every other support in the game, compared to many Pokemon in the game, I think this release has come out extremely underwhelming from how much it can help your team. I think this Pokemon is probably very good if you're able to coordinate around it specifically. And again, if you have an ally kind of popping off, I think it's very good. Unfortunately, I think this is a very, very weak release. And I think because I know this Pokemon needs buffs, and if it gets some buffs, it could be amazing right away. I'm not kidding. I do think this Pokemon lands in either the D or C tier. I think D is probably fair. This Pokemon, I believe, is debuted with the lowest win rate of a Pokemon ever. And that's support. To be fair, that's just kind of a supporter's curse a little bit. But The other thing about Comfey is you're comparing it to the most stacked category basically inside the game. And because of that, and because I think it needs buffs desperately, I do think it needs buffs to make this Pokemon good enough, I have to put it in the D tier. Maybe it's C tier. You can fight me over it if you want, but there's no reality in which you can't recognize that this Pokemon is wildly undertuned. It just is. It needs help. I don't want it to get damage help, necessarily. I want it to be more supportive. I want it to give maybe bigger shields, more healing. I would love to see shielding numbers at the end of a game. Please put that in the game. That would be so amazing. And I think once you do something like that, we could have a much better Pokemon in our hands. Like a few buffs, which this Pokemon, mark my words, will get. This will get buffed. You are not going to see this Pokemon get a nerf. There's no reality in the world where Comfey gets a nerf. With a few buffs, which will come to this Pokemon, I think it rises way up the tier list. But currently, I do think it's one of the more underwhelming releases power level wise inside of Pokemon Unite. Now it's time to talk about our God tier Pokemon of the week. And honestly, a lot of our Pokemon on this list, I feel like in the A+ even tier, a lot of them are amazing. Scyther, I think, is a possibility, but given it's bugged right now and it just recently got nerfs, for me, it's not in contention. There are really two Pokemon in my mind that are vying for the spot of God tier this week, and that is Mew and Urshifu. Kind of both forms of Urshifu in the way you look at it. In a way, I would say it's probably Urshifu that gets our God tier Pokemon, but I actually think Mew is this really wild Pokemon, and here it is. In competitive specifically, you ban Urshifu. You should, please do. But that means you can't ban Mew. You can only ban so many things. And Mew is this Pokemon that is often not banned, but feels like the most valuable thing inside of a team. However, Urshifu is probably the most banned Pokemon in the game, and for good reason. I think you're just in so much trouble if you let either of these Pokemon onto the enemy team, and a lot of times you don't get a choice. There's so many amazing Pokemon inside the game, and given that you only have one ban, something insane is going to hit the enemy team. And I'm waffling a little bit here, but I have to go with what my heart is telling me right now. Even though I think in a lot of ways Urshifu is still better than this Pokemon, I do think our God tier Pokemon of the week is Mew. I think Mew is truly crazy. It didn't get nerfed recently. Urshifu did get nerfed, which kind of hurts Urshifu a little bit. Mew is, I think Mew is busted. I think Mew is busted. Look, I think Urshifu's busted too, don't get me wrong. We could be freaking Norse around here, and I could put them both up in the God tier. But this week, I want to highlight what's going on with Mew, which is a Pokemon that you really can't KO very well. It outputs insane damage at range. It's like a long-range nuker mage with the top mobility inside the game and also able to chase enemies down, and has a Unite move that means you can't hurt it. What? Like, what is going on with this Pokemon? So that is my God tier Pokemon of the week. I hope you enjoyed this tier list. Now we have a little fun where we mix it around and we see if anybody just skipped to the end and they get some weird information. Boop 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 ba 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 dee 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 dee. And that's why Comfey is probably the best Pokemon in the game. It's untargetable when it's attached to an ally, meaning that you can have a Pokemon be a presence inside of a team fight, and multiple times you can just move to the next ally if something gets KO'd. It's a support that gets to support and can do it without being punished by actually being hit, which is unbelievable inside the game. And then when you see other supports like Mime or something like that get nerfs and basically drop all the way down to the bottom of a tier list, you now have room for something like Comfey. And then imagine you take Comfey and you pair it with something like Glaceon and Clefable or something like that. Now you're just doing insane amounts of damage with this Glaceon, and you can't ever KO it. You know, same with Tyranitar. Put a Clefable and a Comfey on that Tyranitar. You can't stop this Pokemon, and you can't stop Comfey. So that's why it is our God tier Pokemon of the week. I hope you enjoyed this tier list. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I will see you all very, very soon. We did it.